Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon, and welcome to the Post 54. Failure Studies. Oh my goodness. This post works with Post 33 on ignorance studies, and both these posts capture something really interesting in the history of publishing. Routledge is now producing this new series of publications, these enormous books, 500 plus pages, called the Routledge International Handbook of. So handbooks are now a thing. And so some of the early titles from Routledge have been Ignorance Studies and, of course, Failure and Failure Studies. How cool is this? And while Ignorance Studies as a book was incredibly successful, a really powerful intervention, the book on Failure and Failure Studies, although really, really interesting, is not quite up to that standard. And there's probably many reasons for that, some of which we'll talk about today. And this book on failure, the International Handbook of Failure, is edited by Adriana Mica et al. And again, a very, very well put together book, just it's lacking the synergy and the connectivity of an argument that we saw in Ignorance Studies. Okay, so there is, though, incredible value in using this book and this moment to think about failure and failure studies. Wow, what an amazing interdisciplinary intervention, perhaps even a post-disciplinary intervention in knowledge and certainly in higher education studies. And there are many reasons why I think failure and failure studies is a really good topic at the moment. And I think one of the great reasons is so much is going wrong at the moment. I'm getting hundreds of emails from you talking about the catastrophic things that are occurring in the workplace, in the public sphere, in the private sphere, in leisure, in finance. It's just a shambles. And I think the reason it's a shambles is we have this notion in our life about success and about this individual narrative of a successful human being who's worked incredibly hard and overcome the odds and triumphed at the end. You know, we've got this success narrative. And we also have this notion in that success narrative that these people have sacrificed so much to be successful. Now, to understand the lie of that narrative, we only have to look at leadership in our organisations, in the public sphere and in the private sphere, and have a look, whatever industry you're in, have a look at the leadership and the people occupying leadership posts in your job, in your organisation. And I'm always very interested, and I do work on this. Look at the narrative of success that they summon for themselves on their profile pages. So go to the organisational webpage and look at the narrative of success that is being configured by the leaders. But then I'd ask that you do something else for me. Okay, they've written that narrative arc. Then go into actual metrics of achievement. So go into the qualifications that they hold. If you're dealing with university and academic life, have a look at their publication list. See if they are the first or sole author. Have a look at their qualifications in terms of teaching and learning. So actually drill down into the metrics before we just believe this sheen, this fairy tale of success. And there are so many lies circulating in life at the moment. Lies about money, about work, about family, about public and private lives, but also about the past and the future. And the past is very carefully edited in these narratives of success. So at its best, failure studies intervenes in these lies. It cuts up those social media narratives of smiling success, you know, a bunch of people shaking hands in suits, the happy smiling snaps on holiday. You know, social media configures and reinforces the simplistic narrative of success. So today we're focusing on failure because it's time to get real. about what's going on in our professional and our personal lives. And also, not only are we subverting and problematizing these lies, but we're going to block the lies that mask as socialization of success for the next generation. Oh yeah. And particularly I think the notion that leadership is granted, success is granted to special, extraordinary, unicorn kind of people that have just worked so incredibly hard to be successful. Because what that suggests, if you believe that story, then those of us who are not successful, we are failures because we haven't been able to meet or match these completely arbitrary benchmarks for success, these arbitrarily configured stretch targets, and the arbitrary assumptions about owning stuff, like if you've got this particular top car, then you're incredibly successful, and this completely arbitrary notion about this is what a successful private life, a successful family looks like. This is really dangerous stuff, okay? So I've done, as you know, a lot of research on leadership. I've got a qualification in it, and I've keynoted on leadership for about 25 years now. So I've done a lot of work on leadership. And in recent years, I've spent a lot of time doing some pretty deep research on higher education leadership. And I need to be really clear here. I've done the really difficult, intricate, full data set analysis of the Vice-Chancellors and the Deputy Vice-Chancellors in Australian and New Zealand universities. And it's quite a good data set, and it's of a size that it is a generalisable data set. And certainly, absolutely, there are extraordinary, wonderful human beings, great people, inspirational scholars amongst those numbers of Vice-Chancellors and Deputy Vice-Chancellors, no doubt. But most of them, when we look at their actual research career, their actual teaching career, their qualifications to have any sort of leadership role in an educational institution, if we actually look at the data set, we see that these human beings are lacking. They're lacking. There's nothing special about that group at all. And they are sourced from a very, very narrow slice of particular academic disciplines. And that's fine. All of us are trained in particular academic disciplines. But then you follow on the narrative of, okay, once they've got a full portfolio leadership role in a comprehensive university, have they broadened out their knowledge, their epistemology, their methodology, their expertise at all? No. And of course, there is a very significant group in these Vice-Chancellors and Deputy Vice-Chancellors who have had something truly catastrophic happen on their watch when they've been a leader in a particular organisation. And yet these catastrophic events have been wiped clean from their narrative of success, the public profile of their success. And the people that were hurt and maimed by the decisions that they made are simply ignored. Okay, so these career narratives have a real fairy tale quality to them. Their success is linear, it's progressive, and it's sort of this arc of profound achievement from a unicorn. That's how it's being configured. But of course, these stories are just that. They're only stories. And when we crack open this supposedly seamless narrative of career progression, the emptiness and the absences become really, really clear. Let me give you some examples. There is an Antipodean Vice-Chancellor who has produced in her entire academic career 15 academic articles. The last one was published in 2001, before our current generation of higher education students were born. And those articles, those 15 articles, have been written with 29 other co-authors and have received 357 citations. And can I say, this is in a high publication discipline and a high cite discipline. Okay, we also have 2 Vice-Chancellors in Australia and New Zealand that do not hold even a PhD, and their first job in a university was actually as a Vice-Chancellor. In other words, they hadn't worked in a university before then. Okay, so I've given you those quick infusions of data, and there's lots of examples that I can use, but there are 3 quick infusions of data sets, and I've done that for you, so that every single one of you that's doing it really tough at the moment, is applying for all these jobs and not hearing from anybody, and it's all just dreadful, and you're feeling like an absolute failure sitting on the lounge suite and rocking from side to side, right? Now, I've given you those stories so that you know that this stuff is not about you. You are not an individual failure, okay? It's not your lack of success that has created this situation. Please remember, there is a Vice-Chancellor with 15 publications, co-authored publications. Now, that level would not get you into a lectureship in Australia and New Zealand at the moment, but we've got a Vice-Chancellor carrying that level of publications. My goodness me. So this is not about these sort of incredibly successful people, these astonishing unicorns that have just had this incredible life of achievement. The inverse is actually the case. And that, by the way, is why our university sector is suffering so greatly. Jean Baudrillard described this as the double refusal of leadership, the refusal to lead, the refusal to be led. Because what's happening is these inelegant metrics are being imposed on academics by people who have never got anywhere near these metrics themselves, okay? And so what's happening is these metrics are imposed and ordinary academics are sort of left feeling like failures most of the time, while these bizarre narratives of career success are being constructed by leaders, and these narratives of success are not actually connected to any fact or evidence. And of course, these people have actually failed in the pillars of academic life: research, teaching, community service, university service. So therefore, let's talk about failure studies to understand what is going on here. Why have we got these bizarre configurations of success? Why are these really weird notions of a successful career being constructed? And what does that do to and for the rest of us? Okay, what I want us to do by the end of this post is I want all of us at the end of this post to, stand up, shoulders back, take a big breath and realise we're doing just fine. We're doing just fine. Hang in there, and let's create some strategies to understand contextually what is going on. I want us to think really strategically about these career narratives and the lies that are just under the surface of them. And remember, these lies, and I have to put up with them, we all have to, someone arrives at a meeting and they just start talking about themselves. They give this sort of career narrative, this spruik, right? And yet when you go beyond the spruik and the spin, beyond this fairy tale, you see that these people have actually underperformed in just about every metric that is important to us. So we are using failure studies today to probe the very nature of career success. Okay, let's do this. Now, the editors of the Routledge International Handbook of Failure confirmed that we too often individualise success, and we individualise, therefore, failure. But to understand failure, Mika et al. Have argued we have to explore, quote, regimes of failure, end of quote. What a great phrase. So that is, we focus far too often on the individuals, but actually we need to look much more closely at what's occurring in public policy and what's occurring in public life. So we need to sort of shift our understanding of success and failure. So we've got to stop blaming individuals for failure. and start to look at the systems and the structures and the contexts around that failure. So failure is important. Failure really, really matters because failure provides us with knowledge. It also provides us with the very punctuation, if you will, the grammar of our emancipation and our freedom. Let me explain. The whole point of failure is it exists to make us feel vulnerable, because it also gives us a gift though. So yes, we're feeling vulnerable, but the gift of that vulnerability, following on from Brown, of course, the gift of that vulnerability is that it increases our awareness of the asymmetries of power. So we feel vulnerable, but through that vulnerability, we start to understand ruthlessly and precisely the power structures around us, and knowing that we are low in the pecking order. And that means when we fail, we confront a really difficult truth. And that truth we confront is there are people with more power than us, and they use that power over us. So the binary opposition of success and failure lies to us. It lies to us. And what happens is, because we've got this binary opposition, when we experience what is supposedly an individual failure, we feel shame, we feel blame, and we mask it. We mask the failure. We hide it from others. And of course, that therefore perpetuates the problem, because it means all the attention is given to the individual success, the individual star, these great career narratives. But of course, success and failure is not remotely about individuals or individual failure. It's about regimes of power. Okay, and these are what Mika et al. Described as, quote, neoliberal logics of success, end of quote. So this is the new way to think about success and failure. Now, yes, it may appear a bit abstract. Let's take this theory for a walk. And I know me saying that success and failure is a binary opposition and it's not functional seems a bit simple if you're right in the middle of a catastrophic, vulnerable, I'm feeling a failure, nothing's going right for me. I understand that, but let me take you by the hand and let's walk through this argument. Please remember that failure is not an event. Failure is not a situation. Failure is a way to frame uneven power relationships. Now, too often we all consider sort of failure as a result of our individual actions or our lack of actions. We just didn't work hard enough. If we worked hard enough, we would have been successful. And, we haven't achieved the expected outcome. We're a loser. We're a failure. But it does change everything, I think, if we ponder failure within a system of power. There are, to cite Micah again, quote, neoliberal logics of success, end of quote. And therefore, there are neoliberal logics of failure. And if you want a quick thumbnail definition of neoliberalism, a lot of great research out there, but neoliberalism is an ideology that prioritises the market and market forces ahead of all other ways of organising people and systems and structures. So neoliberalism values deregulation, individual choice. It values consumption and shopping, valuing competition, privatisation of all industries, and defunding of public institutions such as education, health, and our library services. So neoliberalism is a failed ideology. I've described it, a lot of other people have described it as a zombie ideology. So it's dead and it's still walking about, okay? And clearly died during the global financial crisis in 2008, where the banks pretty well destroyed our economy, our society, real estate, homelessness. So much came from the global financial crisis. And of course, I'm recording this in the first little bit of 2023. And of course, banks that have been deregulated during the Donald Trump administration. So the small to medium-sized banks were deregulated. And of course, what's happened? Those banks have failed again. This is a zombie ideology. But we sort of continue to live and breathe and walk around this zombie neoliberal wonderland. So our regimes of success, our regimes of failure are organised by a dead ideology. We individualise success, we individualise failure, and we're ignoring the truths, the actual stories that exist just below the skin of the narratives of individual success and individual failure. And we see the gulf that exists, particularly now, between the narratives being told of success and the actual reality when you look at the metrics, when you look at the actual evidence occurring in relation to this person's career success. There is an epistemology of success, there is an epistemology of failure in neoliberalism, and we need to start to log this. We need to research it, we need to understand it, we need to apply it in our daily life. We need to speak the words to cut up this individualised unicorn success. It is time that we start to really problematise this narrative of working hard, progress, development, success narrative, and also, of course, the laziness, the mediocrity, the loser, failure narrative. Failure and failure studies is now giving us this space, an alternative lens to see success and see failure in leadership in particular. And we're seeing leadership through the lens of failure studies in a very, very different way. Also because we activate so many metaphors from sport in particular, and I think particularly if you look at how most of us were taught phys ed at school, and winners and losers and the great sports people and the rest of us sort of walking around a field, then failure from sport is tethered to losing face, right? So we've lost, we're a loser, and we should be embarrassed because we're a failure. Failure is what is called, following on from Goffman, self-presentation failure. Self-presentation failure. And further, following on from Goffman, it not only attaches shame to us, but this is important, it attaches stigma to us. If you are a failure, then that is a stigmatized state. And that's why, by the way, we mask it, we hide it. So Julia Grulich particularly looked at the sociology of career failure. And can I say, this research changed my life. I think differently after having read Julia's work. And she highlighted, quite rightly, you know those articles in LinkedIn? Yawn. Let me tell you about how great I am. Let me tell you about my arc to success, my achievement, my push. Let me tell you about how fantastic I am. Right? All those, there's thousands of those sort of LinkedIn success stories. But remember, whenever we individualise success like that, we're also individualising failure like that. And actually, failure has a context. Boom. Failure has a context, so let's talk about that context, particularly for all of you struggling so much with work at the moment, right? Let's talk about what sort of work is available at the moment. Well, we've got profoundly insecure jobs. We've got redundancies and restructures happening all the time. We've got unemployment, underemployment, bullying, sexual assault, sexual harassment, discrimination, involuntary part-time work, underemployment, no chance of professional development or professional learning, and of course, very, very low pay. Therefore, we need to really explore the definition of failure that we are constructing in this type of context for the working day. And particularly, I want to talk about in the post today, what the hell is happening in the contemporary university sector. And of course, it has resonance with the corporate sector. Didn't used to, but now there's just as much in common with the banking sector as there is with universities, as there is with groceries and supermarkets. So that's the nature of the neoliberal logic, by the way. Whatever industry, it doesn't matter. You just apply the same stuff through any industry. So we have this notion in universities that we have this continuous hierarchical advancement that can be managed. So through our life, we continue to advance through promotion. Now, this has often been called the pyramid or the pyramidal career. The notion that there is a career pathway and every year we move one more step up that pyramid to success. Now, this is a real problem that exists, by the way, because that pyramid does not exist for anybody except a very, very few number of people. So we have the model, but it doesn't work for the majority of the population. And of course, this pyramid has now been completely blown up by redundancy, by part-time, contract, casualised work. Part-time work, right? So this pyramidal model is also a heterosexual man's model of success and failure. And it's rare for me to be as overt as that, but actually it was configured as a heterosexual man's model. And I'll tell you why. Because that model required that there was a woman who was married to this man. It would allow him to focus completely on working incredibly hard, working too hard, and going up the pyramid while she basically runs everything else in life. He's got no time for caring or children or just who does the dry cleaning, right? Who does the washing every day? Who washes the dishes, right? So it requires a woman to keep life operating so that a bloke can keep going up that pyramid, right? Now, that model of family and that model of work really hasn't existed since the 1960s, okay? Now we require two incomes to even remotely enable housing security. Okay, one income can't do it. But this model of a man who is supported by his entire family gets him up that pyramidal ladder, right? That's the narrative. But of course, that is over, and it's been over for decades. But we still are living with the residuals of that system a little bit. So we see a lot of groups, and obviously particularly women, and we'll talk about women in a second, but women are at a structural disadvantage in this pyramidal model, in salary, in position, but also in the nature of the steps taken to progress in a career. Let me explain. When a woman is successful, it is not a pyramidal success. So what happens is other words, other phrases, other tropes are used. And the most common one describing women's career trajectory at the moment is the glass cliff. The glass cliff is a woman on a contract 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and they do that contract, but it's a glass cliff post. It appears to have plenty of power, but then of course it ends. It's a risky job, and the woman then has to jump off the glass cliff and hopefully land on another glass cliff, right? That is a very, very risky way of enacting a career, and it's certainly not pyramidal. Now, Eagerly and Carley used a great phrase and trope, first time I've heard of this, called the glass labyrinth. Love this. And they argued that there is a glass labyrinth and men still gain from career profile because they're able to move through the glass labyrinth at greater speed, fewer turns, fewer problems. They're able to move through at speed because they haven't got caring responsibilities. They haven't got career interruptions through childbirth and so forth. And they showed that men tend to do their qualifications, this is interesting, earlier in their lives. So that means for the rest of their career, they build on the qualifications they got earlier in their lives. Interesting. So this means that the pathway through the glass labyrinth for women is longer. So it's got more twists, more turns, more risks, more problems. And of course, those of us that love a good maze, and I love a good maze, we all know you've got to have a system going into the maze, right? You've got to know, you've got to keep turning left. But if you don't realise that you need a system, then, and of course the longer you're in the maze, the less likely you are to get out of it. Same thing with the glass labyrinth. So the longer that a woman is trying to get moving in their career, the more risks, the more hazards, and they're less likely to be successful. Amazing, eh? So this risk of failure increases the longer that a woman is in the glass labyrinth. And so that means that sort of the individual woman is blamed when they're a failure, rather than understanding the actual systems and structures and explaining to women the systems and structures and how they can subvert them a bit. Now, can I say there are many other important variables to explore pathways to career success or career failure. I've done a lot of work on older workers, of course, workers with an impairment or a disability, diverse ethnicities, and I'm incredibly interested, and I've done some work particularly looking at sexual identities and leadership success, some fascinating work coming from the States there. I'm also terribly interested in gendered identities and leadership. So if anybody out there is doing that work, I've got a file open where I'm taking notes, but I'm really interested in you and I'd love to profile the work that you're doing. So this is important. Therefore, as you can see, career failure is not an individual thing ever. It is shaped and it is framed by very specific sociological variables. So this masking and the shaming of failure also exists in research culture. So think about the scale of failed experiments. Think about the scale of failure in clinical trials. But also think about how few publications exist about failed research. We go, oh, look, it's failed research. We don't need to know about it. Let me show you why we need to know about it. It's costing people's lives. Let's do it. So Amelia Petit has shown that because negative results are rarely published and even more rarely publicised because of the impact on future funding sources, there is what she describes as, quote, the tension between the curative and the palliative, end of quote. I told you this was serious. So this means oncology trials are in place on incurable cancers. So there is a delay moving a human being with cancer, stage 4 cancer, and their family into palliative care that can assist and care for them in the last days. So instead, researchers keep on running and repeating the same trials over and over again. So, enacting these terrible narratives on human beings with incurable cancer, right? So the results of this dreadful situation are what Petit describes as, quote, selective publication and ignoring failure, end of quote. And of course, remember, we've also got all these truly bizarre metrics for research success. So our sociology of validation and evaluation deny and marginalise failures. You don't want to see the failures on a CV. You don't want to see the failures in a funding application. And of course, this has profound impacts on knowledge. Wow. Failure remains the trigger for learning. It's also a trigger for accountability. I think that's incredibly important too. It's a rupture in what Goffman described as the presentation of the self in everyday life. So this unbalance, this endless focus on success is reinforced, is intensified through this weird culture around social media. And it means when we do fail, we have this incredible sense of being alone, about being the only failure out there, because Twitter is filled and LinkedIn is filled with everybody's great success. Now, this is absolutely wrong. As Lisa Coromani et al. Described, we need to explore, quote, a failure regime, end of quote. Indeed, and to summon Paul Virilio and a lot of the work I did on Paul Virilio, and this may change your life, Virilio argued that every new technology has the seed of its failure within it at its origin. Changes your life a bit, doesn't it? So every great challenge and disruption and transformation has the seed of its future failure within it. And because we create these narratives of individual success and individual failure, we blind ourselves to policy failures, to procedural failures, to, of course, market failures. So why is financial success granted a priority in every other variable and discussion we have? And of course, the consequences of what's often called financialisation. The consequences of financialisation have a huge impact on public health, public education, and our public libraries. And we see it clearly in our universities. Remember, these are public universities. We are here to serve the public. And yet you wouldn't know that if you look at what's happening in a university with all the attention on private donors. The real estate speculation from university leadership and the privatisation of academic services. So the privatisation of food services, of fitness services, technology consultants, oh my goodness me. And then, of course, we're going to go there, the truly dire professional recruitment services, the headhunters that are used by universities around the world. When we've got truly wonderful, brilliant, interesting human beings in HR departments in our universities, we rely on these privatised consultants, professional recruiters. Isn't that going well? So, failure studies at its best blocks the cliches that circulate around us. So we stop talking about the fear of failure. There's no fear in failure. Instead, we use failure as a key to unlock our understanding of systems and structures. So why are we valuing an individual over a community? Why are we valuing competition over compassion? Failure studies describes what Janet O'Shea stated as, quote, intentional unlearning. Intentional unlearning. Changed my life, that phrase. Intentional unlearning. So this means we stop thinking about career narratives as having this particular shape or structure, and we start to transform our cliches. Instead of a fear of failure, we learn in failure. We learn with failure. So when we promote experimentation, we have strong collaboration, we have strong teamwork, then we're no longer reliant on this simplistic binary opposition of success and failure. That's rubbish. Instead, we realise that failure has a context. Just as there's no singular way to be successful, there's no singular way to fail. The homology, though, of leadership and leadership positions at the moment, they are lying to us. That narrative lies to us because we're presented endlessly with this singular face of success, and failure is invisible. But when we realise through failure studies that failure is not only common, but it is meaningful, then it changes the very grammar of our lives. I wish you love, light, and peace. Tea out.